am now 30 miles from Newcastle. Becoming a gainer at twice brewed by a broken promise, which is seldom the case, I retreated next morning over a moss to my favourite pursuit, which brought me to Housesteads, the grandest station in the whole line. In some stations, the antiquary feeds upon shells, but here upon kernels. Here lie the remains of ancient splendour in bold characters. The station is, of course, much elevated, declines to the south. The ramparts are plain. A very large suburb seems to have been added to this populous city, now reduced to one solitary house, the whole about 15 acres. The curious observer, I believe, may count 20 streets. The population, perhaps, could not be less than 2,000 or 3,000 souls. From the melancholy relics on the spot, it must have been graced with some elegant buildings. It is not easy to survey these important ruins without a sigh. A place once of the greatest activity, but now a solitary desert. Instead of the human voice is heard nothing but the winds. I had now the severe task of creeping up rocks and climbing stone walls, not well adapted to a man who has lost the activity of youth. Being invited by a single house in the valley of some magnitude called Bradley Hall, where I might gain knowledge, I descended the hill to tread upon that venerable ground. Entering the hall, the family seemed to strive which should treat me with the most kindness. I think myself bound to place Vinderlander, now Little Chester's, among the stations, that I may follow my predecessors and not break their numerical order. Although Roman and garrisoned by Romans, it does not appear to belong to the works of Severus. It stands near 2 miles south of the wall.
While I remained at Hest Bank, I received 2 scraps of paper torn from my father's pocketbook. The first, in which he told me he was sound in body, shoe, and stocking, and had just risen from a lodging among fleas. The second, when he informed me that the weather was so hot he was obliged to repose under hedges, and that the country was infested with thieves. But, lest I should be under any apprehensions for his personal safety, he added, they were only such as demolished his idol, the wall, by stealing the stones of which it was composed.
Easyker, now Great Chester Station, is elevated as usual, and 35 miles from Newcastle, about 5 acres, very uneven. No buildings remain, except a modern farmhouse, all the doors of which I found open, and none to guard the premises but a child, from whom I could gain no intelligence. There was no danger of a thief, for in this solitary place he must come a great way to take a little. The wall in confusion is here about 3 feet high. The swelling banks show where the castle stood, and particularly mark the battlements. Perhaps I am the first man that ever travelled the whole length of this wall, and probably the last that will attempt it. Drawing near Cockmount Hill, 400 yards forward, and in a high situation, I am frequently favoured with a few courses of facing stones. Agricola and Hadrian, still half a mile south, in the valley. The reason is Severus attempts a precipice, if he can. Here the wall ascends the rocks. We arrive at Wall Town, if a single house deserves the name. On each side the door stands a Roman altar, used for washing hands, kettles, and dishes, and has at last the honour of supporting the dish-clout. I saw one old female who treated me shyly, and heard a younger who durst not see me, and both, I have reason to think, wished me gone. But perhaps I had the most reason to be frightened. The wall ascends the rocks. The name is Warton Crag. I found the ascent so difficult that I sometimes was obliged to crawl on all fours. Here the wall, having facing stones on each side, allowed me to take the measure. I found its thickness barely 9 feet. In one place, for about 2 yards, and that upon a sharp declivity, there are 8 courses of facing stones. Opposite, therefore, to Carvoren was erected in after ages on the north side of Severus's wall Thirlwell Castle, from the Scots breaking through. The situation of Thirlwell Castle is well chosen upon an elevated round knob of earth. It is the property of the Earl of Carlisle, and far gone in decay. Here I met with all the civility even friends could bestow. I am now in that part of the wall which nature had the least defended, for the river Tipple falls into the North Tyne. I had this river to cross and this mountain to ascend, but did not know how to perform either. I effected a passage over the river by the assistance of stones as large as myself, sometimes in and sometimes out, but with difficulty reached the summit of the precipice by a zigzag line through the brambles, with a few scratches. Old people are much inclined to accuse youth of their follies, but on this head silence will become me, lest I should be asked, what can exceed the folly of that man who, at 78, walked 600 miles to see a shattered wall?
My father frequently walked with his waistcoat unbuttoned, but the perspiration was so excessive that I've even felt his coat damp on the outside from the moisture within, and his bulk visibly diminished every day. The pace he went did not even fatigue his shoes. He walked the whole 600 miles in one pair, and scarcely made a hole in his stockings.